Good evening and welcome to the Advocacy and Action Spotlight Speaker Series, an opportunity to learn more about advocacy and advocates offered by the Jack, Joseph, and Morton Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences at Case Western Reserve University. I'm your host, Dr. Sherry Warren, with my colleague, Dr. Scott Wilkes, Associate Dean of Student Services and Academic Affairs. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome our guest, who has several years of experience with housing policy and advocacy team at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and who now leads the organization's efforts in field outreach, organizing, and advocate mobilization efforts as their Senior Director of Field Strategy and Innovation. We are so grateful that Ms. Brooke Schipporeit is able to join us this evening. Welcome, Brooke. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, and hello, everyone.
This is pretty exciting, and folks who joined early may have heard. An old colleague of mine is how I bumped into Brooke and her work. And I love how small and yet how large the advocacy world is at times. Brooke, I don't know if most people that you work with know that you have a master's of social work.
It is surprising how many MSW student or MSW folks we have at our organization. I have never seen that in other organizations. So actually, I don't think a ton of people do, other than our own internal group of folks who also share an MSW.
Well, it is certainly not why I wanted to have a conversation with you tonight, but it is just a fantastic happenstance. One of our goals here with the Spotlight Speaker Series is to be able to introduce students from all over, as well as faculty, staff, and any of our guests who join us, to the many ways that one can use a Master's of Social Work degree. And I tend towards macro policy work myself. And so I'm always tickled when I can find a social worker who is doing that kind of work and is willing to share about it. And if I remember correctly, you went to undergraduate school in Nebraska.
Yeah, I'm actually from Nebraska. So I got my undergraduate, my BSW, from Nebraska Wesleyan University. I had never heard of social work until my freshman year of college, where I was like trying to decide what I wanted to do. I knew I loved working with people. And so went the psychology route because that's what I thought it meant with working, that's what I thought working with people meant. And then I had an advisor who just happened to put me in an intro to social work class. And it was like the world just lit up, and things clicked. That is what I was really interested in, was how, not just how an individual works, but how communities work and work together, and how different programs and systems work together as well.
It sounds like both of our origin stories are not too terribly different, in that I grew up in a very rural part of central Kansas,
Yep.
didn't know what social work was, and stumbled into it much later in life and was just so thrilled to have found a profession that spoke to my love of networking and connecting people and helping people while also trying to address the problems that are causing them to seek help to begin with.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
we Plains women represent tonight.
That's right. I love it.
Well, so I'm curious then, you started this in your undergraduate career as a bachelor's student, kind of stumbling into social work. What drew you to this policy work and the advocacy type of work that you do?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny to me, because I grew up also in a very rural community, very insulated from the world and not really grew up with a lot of folks who weren't really educated on, our system's failures or really engaged in civic engagement. Beyond, casting their ballot. But other than that, kind of just like went on with their daily lives and weren't always privy to what's happening in the world. And so I never really saw myself as an advocate. I didn't think that I enjoyed politics. I didn't want to be part of that. And then the more I learned and got about social work and got further into my undergraduate degree, the more I saw that we were, there's nothing wrong with case management or therapy or, that micro work. It's very, very important. But I kept feeling like there was something missing for myself and feeling like I was going to be putting band-aids on situations. And I took a social policy class with an adjunct professor who worked at Nebraska Appleseed and was really involved in advocacy, also has her MSW. And that really opened my eyes to how the systems are failing people and how those have to be changed for broader long-term impact across communities. And she made it very fun and engaging and very accessible to someone like myself who was not totally sure about that area of work. And she actually ended up I loved that class so much. I wanted to do my practicum with her, and she ended up getting elected to the state legislature. So I ended up getting to intern with her in the state legislature and see how policies were made and see that behind the scenes, that advocate in an elected official position and kind of really painting a picture for me of like what's happening and why this matters. So that was really impactful for me.
What an opportunity. I also had my MSW policy course with an adjunct professor who worked part-time for one of our state's Congress people.
Oh,
She was
cool.
his social policy expert. And the next year, I tried to see if I could weasel into an internship with her, but they couldn't figure out how to make it happen, right?
So
So
close.
I have internship envy.
Yeah, it was an opportunity of a lifetime, and really shaped I didn't go directly into advocacy right after that. I did case management for a few years, and then some more of that kind of community engagement level work, that was closer to direct service than advocacy, but it really shaped kind of my view of the world and how I approached the work moving forward and left a hunger for me to come back.
Then you picked up and went to Pennsylvania for your MSW, right?
Yes, my husband was going to law school there, so that was the relocation. And I thought, I was struggling to find a job at that time after relocating. And so I thought, what the heck, why not go back to school? And it really opened up some opportunities, which I would tell all of the attendees here. Really, utilizing your opportunities in school, and the connections you make for internships or learning about different groups was really impactful for me in kind of cracking into that job market in Pennsylvania. And so that's where I found housing policy. I was also completely oblivious to the housing world. I'd worked in Head Start in early childhood education and ran across a lot of families needing housing supports, but I just kept referring them to our housing experts. And I did a like state policy practicum for my MSW. And every time I kept saying, well, I think I want to go back to education, or I think I want to do this, I would learn more about how housing is connected to all different issues that I was really passionate about. And I just kept coming back to it.
Sometimes I feel like the universe knows what we need before we know we need it. We're
Yes.
drawn in.
Yes.
Well, Dr. Wilkes and I are two of the policy professors here at Case Western Reserve, and so I'm just tickled that he does this work with me, and he has a JD degree as well, and so he
Oh,
brings
great.
some understanding of the legal world that I don't have myself.
That's awesome. There's so many different, that's what attracted me the most to social work was all the different avenues you could take, and different ways that you could plug in to make a difference. And also that you can continue doing that throughout your whole career. You don't have to be pigeonholed and decide something right after school. You can kind of see where the world takes you and try out some different things.
Absolutely. The flexibility of this skill set is phenomenal.
Hmm.
So you were working with folks for whom housing was clearly one of the struggles that they were facing. Is that what drew you in?
Um, it wasn't at first. It was I first, like I said, was in early childhood education, and it just kind of was on the side happening, as an issue that families were facing. And then I also did worked at a domestic violence emergency shelter for women and children facing domestic violence, which very now I very clearly understand is also very tightly linked to having a safe, affordable home, and is part of our homeless shelter system. But I still didn't quite see it as a housing issue. What really clicked for me, then I also in Pennsylvania worked with people with disabilities and older adults and worked on accessibility of housing. And I think what clicked for me was that I was working in the state policy advocacy world a little bit in my practicum, and every time I felt like it, maybe wasn't the right path for me, I like I said, kept learning about how it intersected with different issues, and I realized I could stay plugged into a lot of different issues without having to pick one by picking housing. So I also had an adjunct professor in grad school who taught community organizing. And that is really what I think drew me in was the people power, community power building work through advocacy and through community organizing. And his focus was through affordable housing development and doing community organizing through that. And that really um, felt like a path that I was excited about and passionate about and haven't really looked back since.
Well, and clearly it's something that I think everyone can identify with the understanding of home
Mhm.
and safety and not just somewhere to put your stuff, but somewhere to connect to.
Yeah. And I tell our, interns that all the time. We're housing will get you. It'll it'll become you'll get aware of what the issues are, and it might suck you in whether you want it to or not. But I say that jokingly because I know everyone has a role to play across different sectors and issues. But I think it's really important to understand the housing world, no matter what area of work you're in. We have a lot of different partners who are in different sectors, whether it's working with veterans or healthcare or childcare, or the aging community, and they work with us not be they don't see it as mission creep but mission critical to their work, and so that's really stuck with me, and we in turn support their work as well because no one lives their lives in a silo. No one separates out their healthcare needs and their food needs and their housing needs. All of those encompass the full scope of their needs, and like you said, a safe, affordable home is the foundation for all other areas of life.
I love how you said that. And this, I'm sure that sometimes folks in this work have to check in and see, is this mission creep? Am I staying in my lane? But when we're talking about one of what Maslow would have said was one of the most critical pieces of a person's existence in order to move towards thriving, really, people need housing.
Hmm.
I am somewhat familiar with the idea of housing first. Is that one of the approaches that you take within your work, or that people understand it's not creep, it's a practicality?
Yes, that is something that we prioritize in our policy advocacy. And there's a big debate happening at the federal level and across the country right now about um, whether housing first works or not. The research shows that it does. But the thing that we emphasize is that it's housing first, it's not housing only. So there's a lot of housing programs or homeless shelter programs that used to, and some still do, require, sobriety or get rid of your pet before you can come in, or, just a lot of high barriers to access that shelter or safe, stable home. And so that's where the term housing first comes from, is get someone housed and then the rest of, supports and services, mental health, healthcare, getting a job, all those things become much easier once you have a safe place to call home, go home and shower, rest, recharge. And so most of those programs are paired with services as well. And it's kind of meeting the person where they're at in terms of what they need. Do they just need a home because they, had a rough patch in their life, or do they also need mental health services? Do they need job training? What do they need to stay stably housed beyond that housing first moment?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for unpacking that a little bit more for me. You said that there's kind of a big debate going on in Washington, or at least nationally, about this. Are there people who feel like housing is not one of the first needs that we should be addressing?
Um, a lot of it comes from some of the politics and some of the beliefs of who is deserving for a house. So, making sure people feeling like it's a lot of the stigma that comes with people experiencing homelessness, being the stigma that they're, drug addicts or criminals or whatever. And so some people feel that they need to clean up their lives before they deserve a house. And data shows that that is not successful in getting folks the services and treatment that they need if they need it, or keeping people stably housed. So there's a lot in the federal government right now to cut programs that do housing first and instead force people into treatment before they can
Mm.
get the services. So that's something that we're pushing back on. Because it just shows that it really creates a lot of distrust for people, and then they're not able to access the services that they need or the housing that they need.
Okay. We have a question from one of our viewers, Brooke, saying
Yeah.
that she has heard on NPR and done some reading that housing first might not be as beneficial as we originally thought it would be. And she asks if you can comment on the validity of that.
I'm curious who was talking about that. Because we have decades of research, we being like the housing and homelessness research community, have decades of research. Housing first came about, I want to say, in the like I think the 90s, and we have a couple decades of research to show that people using the housing first method tend to stay housed at like 97% stably housed like a year or two later, whereas housing for other programs have much less success. So I'd love to hear if you happen to have the link. I'd love to learn more, because obviously research evolves and we continue to learn throughout the years.
Absolutely. I mean, 97% sounds pretty successful.
Hmm.
And folks viewing, if you do have questions, feel free to put those into the Q&A and Dr. Wilkes will pass those forward to us. Also, if you do have any links that you want to share, we will be gathering links and resources and sharing those back out after our conversation with Brooke.
And I'd be happy to find some of that research that we cite, and share that with the group so you can share that afterwards.
Thank you, Brooke. Now, you mentioned some of the industries isn't the right word, some of the niche social work worlds that
Hmm.
intersect, and I'm fully aware that you are with a coalition. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about members of the coalition and how the coalition uses that collective energy.
That's a great question. Yeah, so coalition is in our name, and we are a very broad tent coalition, meaning that we have folks from all different areas of work, all different areas of life, all different areas of the country. So we have folks in our coalition who, by being a part of our coalition, they are part of it to varying degrees, whether they're a dues paying member. We're a membership organization, so they could be a dues paying member, either individually or organizationally. They could just be, someone who gets our emails and is interested in this subject and, maybe attends some webinars or takes action on some of our advocacy alerts. Or maybe they're a state and tribal partner who's like a statewide organization who does this work on the state and local level and is a really engaged partner in our work and in our advocacy. So our broad tent coalition, knowing that there's varying degrees of how folks plug into our work, we have anywhere from housing providers, housing developers. We have local government officials in their offices. We have advocate organizations. We have direct service organizations. So we have like a lot of community action organizations, homeless shelter or homeless service providers, food assistance, and other, folks who provide kind of the whole package of, different resources that folks may need. And so we have this broad coalition of folks, and we also have people who are directly impacted. We have folks who either have formerly experienced homelessness or maybe, housing instability through maybe an eviction or have had to couch surf with friends and family before, or really just struggled to pay rent and, we're kind of living paycheck by paycheck to pay the rent. Or people who are currently experiencing homelessness. We have folks as well, who are all part of this coalition, and the power, um, you know, that can be challenging in any coalition building, to find consensus and to agree on a direction forward. And we all have our differences, of course, and opinions on the direction we're going and the nitty gritty pieces of the direction we're going and how we get there. But we can all agree that we want the lowest income renters to have a safe, stable home that's affordable to them. So we all work together and learn from one another. And I think that makes us really powerful because of all the different perspectives involved and all the different voices. There's rural, urban, hearing from the developer side to the service provider side and the person who's accessing these services. That makes our policy advocacy stronger and better informed.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, Brooke. The diversity among the types of entities that get involved in coalition work. I often tell students you never know who you're going to be working alongside, and you may not have the same reasons for doing it, but you
Hmm.
generally want the same outcome. And I find that work fascinating.
Yes, absolutely.
That is so interesting to me. Just I've had to explain the phrase, and I honestly don't know where it comes from. I always say, anytime I don't know where a phrase comes from, I say, oh, it's probably Shakespeare. But that politics makes for strange bedfellows.
Yes.
That's coalition work to me. You never know who you will be standing alongside working for the same thing.
Yes. And we have, like I said, multi-sector groups, so people who aren't even involved in the housing world, but got involved because, they were providing food assistance in a community, and they were realizing that, folks were who were accessing food assistance were also struggling to pay their rent. Or, the rent was eating first and having struggling to buy the food that they needed. And so they've partnered with us, and they serve as a really, they and other sectors serve as a really strong voice to elected officials who may not care that much about housing, or know, that might not be in their sphere of passion or expertise, but they hear someone from the veterans community or the healthcare community, and that they really care about. And having that voice relay why housing is important to that sector really serves as a powerful messenger for those elected officials.
So, with regard to our elected officials, what's your average week look like with regard to reaching out to those or attending legislative committee meetings? What kind of stuff do you do?
Yeah. So mine's maybe less exciting than our policy team. Our policy team, there are actually a lot of advocacy organizations where my team and the policy team are one and the same, but we are, I would say, lucky that we get to separate that out and really focus. My team really focuses in on organizing and relationship building with people across the country rather than the elected officials as much. So our policy team does attend a lot of committee hearings in Congress, whether virtually or in person. We occasionally will have our CEO testify at those hearings, which is really exciting. And so the policy team helps prep those testimony materials, and my team helps kind of gather input from the field, is what we call it. So all those folks I talked about in our coalition, that's who our field team is really working with, the team that I work with. So we're building relationships with the service providers, the people directly impacted, the housing providers and developers, and trying to get them contacting their members of Congress. So a lot of my week looks like phone calls, presentations, really kind of sharing, translating what's happening on Capitol Hill and in DC, to states and local communities, which is where my passion really is demystifying that process, and really helping folks understand the issues and how they can get involved, how they can make their voice heard, and why that matters. And so we work very closely with our policy team, do multiple meetings a week to kind of get the latest intel on whether it's a one-on-one meeting they're having with the member of Congress and that staff, or a committee hearing that they want to share the latest intel on, and then we can relay that to folks in the field. And sometimes we'll follow up with folks and be like, hey, this person said something in this hearing that was like maybe a little concerning. Maybe there's a little education that needs to happen and relationship building. And so we'd love for you to set up a meeting with that elected official. So we play kind of a supportive role and occasionally do attend those meetings as well. But mostly just once a year during our Capitol Hill Day, where we have folks in person on Capitol Hill.
I see. My brain likes metaphors, and I'm envisioning like this conduit that the policy and the advocacy like translate back and
Yes.
forth between constituents or coalition members and policymakers over here. And there's translation back and forth. Does that describe
That's
it?
100% right. Yes. I love that. Yeah, because not only are we taking the policy team, like you said, that information and translating, but like you said, it's a conduit of back and forth. So we're taking what we're hearing, someone who, for an example, we had some folks reach out to us who were like, I got this letter in the mail that my voucher, they've lost funds for this voucher and I don't know what that means. Can you help me understand? And we tried getting them some help in thinking it was a one-off situation. Well, then we hear a few more and we're like, ooh, this is a little concerning. What's happening? And so reaching out to our state partner to get some more info to see if they've had interactions with the housing authority in their community, and then sharing that back with the policy team to be like, raise the alarms on the Hill or in the administration to say, this is an issue that's coming up for folks and like what's going on? What can we do about it?
Thank you. Um, I think many of us probably are familiar with at least some of the reasons that we have a homelessness or a houselessness problem in our nation. And I have kind of a two-pronged question here, so I'll start with part of it. Why do you think our nation tolerates so much homelessness, especially among our families and our children?
Yeah,
Why are we okay with this?
it's a really good question. I think it comes back to um it's not an easy thing to solve and it does take money. And so people, there's that. So it's a little more challenging. And so a lot of the quick fix, quote unquote, solutions aren't real solutions. And so homelessness, is kind of perpetuated through time. But I think there's also a lot of dehumanizing uh of people. It's easier to look past the problem if you're dehumanizing someone or kind of us versus them situation. Um and it kind of goes back to that question of who deserves housing and a lot of the rhetoric what I've heard where I'm from or even elsewhere is why don't they just get a job. So it's a lot of misunderstanding of the situation and the individuals find themselves in, um until it happened, until it hits close to home. We're all you know maybe we're not all, but a lot of us are, working paycheck to paycheck or one, big health event away from, being very financially stable to maybe less so. And so you don't really realize, I think, how hard it is to keep a stable home until you've had to experience that yourself. So for me, it's a lot of educating folks on our research shows that most people who can work do. A lot of folks who aren't in the labor force are caregivers, or in school, or have a disability or an older adult. So just kind of showing that data of why we're in the situation that we are and doing some education around that and doing more humanizing stuff too, because data can kind of glaze the eyes over
Mhm.
sometimes with folks, and it also feels I've learned through experience as well that just throwing data at a conversation isn't an effective way in engaging someone, and like hearing their side of the story is really important, and being curious, asking questions, and not shutting down the conversation, but just really inviting it as a conversation to kind of be like, well, this is my experience. And I know this person who actually has a job and is currently homeless and is just really struggling to like afford that first security deposit and first and last month's rent. And they're working 3 jobs and they still can't. And so like just kind of doing those little pieces of education. But yeah, I went on a tangent there, I think. I do think there's just a lot of to sum it up, there's a lot of problems in our country and our world. And sometimes it's easier to blame someone who's experiencing it than it is to do the work that it takes to solve it.
Well, so my other prong then of this is about solutions. So you mentioned that there are developers in your coalition. What are some of the barriers that keep us from creating more affordable housing that more people can access? Um, what are the solutions that we can do with policy or with community to address those?
Yeah. So our research really shows that despite what a lot of like state and local communities try to do because it's frankly easier to do it, building middle income housing, our research shows that the greatest shortage is really with the lowest income households. And any shortage we see further up the income ladder actually can be attributed to the lowest income individuals, because so let's say an extremely low income household, there's a really, really big shortage of affordable homes for them. And so they're having to compete for housing that's affordable to higher income levels, and that makes the rent more competitive for those higher income households. So if we build more affordable housing for extremely low income and very low income households, that actually frees up housing further up the income ladder as well, and helps the market. So that trickle down economics doesn't really work here. And so the other piece of that is that extremely low income households are either earning 30% of the area's average income or area median income, or the federal poverty line, whichever is higher in that community. Um, so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about extremely low income households. And housing developers and housing providers can't actually on their own provide housing that's affordable to that low level of like what they could afford, because of the amount of money it takes to upkeep and to maintain and do repairs and stuff on a home. And so that's where Congress comes in, to fund and bridge that gap between what someone who's a very extremely low income household, what they can afford and what the market can like sustain. So we do that through housing choice vouchers, different types of like rental assistance that's either attached to the household or to the housing development itself. And then also making it easier for housing developers to build housing. So that comes in, we need the money to do it, but then also making it easier so that folks can build more multifamily housing in areas that maybe are zoned a certain way that makes it harder for that, so that we can have folks can have more options and affordable housing options in communities, with good schools, with jobs, with transportation. So that's why we focus our efforts on the federal level. That's not to say states and communities don't still play a role in those similar types of programs. But on their own, they don't have the finances to fully solve the need. So that's why we really push Congress to provide the funding and the resources necessary. So the federal budget is happening right now, the appropriations process, and is due by midnight tomorrow night. And that's every year we really push Congress to pass a full spending bill that has our key programs that really target the lowest income households.
Okay, that makes sense. I wasn't sure what the barriers were, and in my mind, I just kept thinking, is it just about greed? But it's about that the market can't even bear it
Yeah. And
and
there is,
be able to maintain something.
some people who, there's naturally occurring affordable housing, but it can quickly become in disrepair, or, just already have some issues that makes it less safe for people to live in.
I see. Thank you. We have another question from a student that has to do with housing choice vouchers. For my community practice policy course, I am learning about the federally proposed 2-year limit on housing choice vouchers. Do you or your organization have any involvement advocating against this? Could you possibly speak to the effects of this proposed limit and how community organizers should act or respond? Good
That's
question. So
a
timely.
very, yes, that is such a good question. So we strongly oppose time limits or work requirements. Um, to keep it simple, like the reason is because, like what I said, most people who can work do. So putting those limits and work requirements actually just creates more red tape for people uh to get the resources that they need and to hold on to them. There are folks who work really low wage jobs, sometimes multiple jobs. And I can share some links as well to our a research report that really demonstrates the gap between wages and rent, and how wages have not kept pace with the rising rents through the decades. And so putting a 2-year limit is not encouraging folks to, work harder or get a higher income, because they're already often working multiple jobs at the wage that they can currently get. So that will actually increase housing instability and put folks at risk of homelessness.
Thank you.
But really
I'm,
great question.
yeah, fantastic question. I'm curious if there are other emerging concerns that are impacting the folks that have low incomes, particularly this extremely low income category that you've mentioned, or just things that are happening policy wise or even culturally that are of concern on the horizon.
I'll try not to be too doom and gloom because there are a lot of challenges that we're facing right now. But let me just preface it all with, um, there's some really amazing people in this work and people across the country who are stepping up and doing a lot of, community building and just power building across the country to make sure people have what they need. But some of the challenges that we are facing right now, are what we call criminalization of homelessness. So people who are currently experiencing homelessness and are very, visible homelessness. There's folks who we consider homeless who are maybe staying with friends or family, but it's not a permanent situation. And there's folks who are, street homeless in encampments and stuff. And a lot of, like I said, it requires funding and streamlining services and, fixing some systems to make it easier for folks to access the resources that they need. Um, and a lot of folks are just trying to do out of sight, out of mind, as a quick fix, for street homelessness. So they are ticketing and fining people for being, existing on streets, even if they have nowhere to go. They're arresting them if they don't leave by a certain time. But this is really challenging because, like I said, they have nowhere to go. A lot of shelters are at capacity, and then a lot of folks, for varying reasons, do not trust shelters or have had bad experiences, and so prefer to stay in their encampment community. And it makes it a lot harder for service providers and outreach workers to connect with these folks and build that trust to bring them into those housing first programs. So that's one thing that we're seeing a really big uptick in communities passing laws that criminalizes homelessness. Um, and then, of course, the federal budget, we're a little concerned about there being a government shutdown, and depending on how long that would be, could impact people being able to pay their rent if they're receiving a housing choice voucher, or if the housing authority pays the rent on a property. Um, those funds only last for so long, and we have a little bit of wiggle room, but that is a big concern. And then lastly, there's some regulations happening through the administration where they're pulling back on some fair housing stuff and just different protections and rights for people um, who, especially attacks on Black and Brown communities. So there's this rule called the mixed status rule where people who, let's say it's an immigrant family who has mixed immigration statuses. That family can receive a housing choice voucher or other housing subsidy, but only the people who are eligible with their immigration status. So the rent is prorated. Um, for that. And the administration is putting forth a proposed rule that all folks in the family would have to be eligible, regardless of how many people are, receiving that subsidy. Um, and so that would force, if it is finalized, would force a lot of families to split up or, um, would create a lot of fear in accessing services that they need. So there's a lot of different angles that we're looking at, homelessness, some of the housing programs, and then some of the, intersecting issues with immigrants, immigrant families, or attacks on fair housing to make sure everyone has access.
Okay, thank you. That's so targeted.
Yes.
What I have, so I have a couple questions still about housing, and then I kind of want to come back around to advocacy in a broader sense. Um, I know a lot of communities are really focused on mixed income housing, tiny house villages, lots of creative solutions to address the need in their own community. What do you think of those models? Are they viable? Are they sustainable?
It's a good question. I tend to defer to communities. I think there's a mix amount of research whether all of like the mixed income communities or the inclusive communities designs, not because mixed income communities or inclusive communities don't work, but I think those specific like program models, there's some mixed research on how effective those have been, and so there's definitely some things we could learn from how to improve those. I think that tiny homes also have a mixed amount of research, and we tend to lean away from that just because we want folks to have a more permanent home, but we're not against it either. Like if that is the best next option for a community, especially in getting someone who, needs a temporary home to get off the streets, and there's not shelter available, that could be a viable option. So I love creativity. I love that communities are trying to meet the need. And I think it's really important that we're open to that. I think it's also important for folks to um, I think a lot of folks come in and, who are maybe new to the housing world and come up with these new ideas without talking to community members. So I think it's a balance of it's important for folks to stay connected to the community and listen to the community, what the needs are, both service providers and folks who are directly impacted, and figure out a path forward to meet the need both in the short, medium, and long term.
Okay, thank you. That's smart. That's smart. So steering us a little bit towards advocacy again and your career. What advice would you give to a beginning social worker who wants to be a more effective advocate?
That's a really good question. I think the the best advice I can give someone, just because I've seen it play out so many times, is don't wait until you feel you're ready or an expert. Um, Everyone has expertise and their own experiences, with their own personal life in their communities that they live in, or grew up in. And then as a, young professional in the programs or systems that you're working in. And so speaking to your experiences and perspectives, makes you an expert in that area. And all of the, like we talked about before, that broad coalition, those broad range and diverse perspectives are what makes us really strong and powerful as a movement. I've seen a lot of people quiet their voice down or stay quiet because they don't feel like they know what they're talking about. And I personally have felt that way too. And I think it's, of course, important to, like, listen and to learn and not speak on something that you don't maybe know as much about, but it's always valid to speak to your own experiences, and to your community and what you're seeing there.
Thank you. That's good advice for all of us. I'm wondering if there was a person or an event that really made an impression on you professionally.
Um, Definitely the adjunct professor who um I had in grad or in undergrad who introduced me to policy work. Um, and then after that, I would say, really just the folks that I've gotten to meet through doing this work and like learning from people, um, getting to meet people who have been directly impacted by housing instability or homelessness, and learning that I am not, the expert on their lives,
Mm.
and to listen and to use that to inform my own advocacy work and to understand how to bring folks along and use any of my privileges to bring folks along and elevate their voices and own lived experiences, I think has been really powerful. So I can't think of like one specific experience, but kind of the accumulation of folks that I've gotten to work with and learn from, who just feel so passionately about how, a housing choice voucher has impacted their family and their lives,
Mm.
for the better, and wanting to make that known across the country in every way that they possibly can, and looking to us for ways to do that. That continues to fuel my fire to keep going. And I learn a lot along the way from those individual stories that have a common thread throughout, with their experiences and how that's impacted their lives. And just like to hear their own passion has just really fueled, my passion as well.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yes, the contagious enthusiasm.
Yes. Because the work's hard, and it's hard to, advocacy is a long haul. And it's hard work, and there's a lot of discouraging moments along the way, but those are the reminders of why we do what we do as advocates and as social workers, and uh, reminding that we can't do it alone and that we all have a role to play together.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Each of us having our really important why to help us get up when we feel downtrodden or we get knocked down. Remembering our big picture why
Yes,
to help keep us
absolutely.
going. Now, viewers, I had asked Brooke when we were preparing for tonight's conversation if she would share perhaps a reading or a podcast or just a resource that has been really valuable to her. And that will get sent out in a follow-up email. But Brooke, what resources do you turn to, or what's something that has just really been profound in shaping who you are?
Oh, that's a very good question. I was just going to share some NLHC resources, but that I wouldn't say has been as profound as some other resources. I will say, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, or will be at some point, Brene Brown, her podcast, she's a social worker. She has been really shaping me in this moment in the past like 10 years or so. This moment in our country where it's feeling more and more polarized, and we're doing more and more of that kind of dehumanization of the othering. And she's been really powerful to me in how she talks about community and like leaning into the discomfort, and kind of who I go back to when I'm feeling like this is really hard work. So I have found her to be very inspiring.
Well, Brooke, our sound just went out.
Oh,
Oh, goodness, but it doesn't say you're muted.
can you hear me?
There, you're back.
My laptop occasionally will switch the microphone for no reason, so sorry about that.
Oh, technology.
Yes. But yeah, there's a lot of different uh, authors, all different types of walks of life and backgrounds. But that's who I recently read, Braving the Wilderness, Brene Brown, and talked a lot about kind of leaning into that discomfort, bridging, our differences, and that's been kind of fueling and shaping who I currently am in this moment as an advocate. And then, I can also share some ways that folks can learn about advocacy, some resources that we have, and different ways to be an advocate. There's a lot of I think that's another piece of something that I've found really helpful, is that being an advocate looks a million different ways, and depending on how much energy and capacity you have, there are a lot of different ways you can get involved. So we put out some really cool toolkits to kind of learn about an issue, and then have some additional resources for folks to learn about different ways that they can take action.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I just was skimming through my email because I'd seen this morning. Brene Brown has a new book coming out called Strong Ground
Oh,
that she wrote with organizational psychology professor Dr. Adam Grant,
nice. I'll
which
have to check it
sounds
out.
really interesting. Yeah, she's got some great perspectives to share. Thank you so much. So, viewers, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our program this evening. Dr. Wilkes is going to share a slide with you with a QR code so that we can give you the opportunity to share your feedback. We'd love to learn a little bit about who you are and what kind of topics you would like to learn more about here in the Spotlight Speaker Series. We do our best to connect your interests with people on the leading edge of advocacy at the local, state, and national levels. Brooke, It has been such a pleasure talking with you and learning more about the critical work that you are doing to address our nation's affordable housing crisis.
Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for having me. It's been a pleasure getting to know you all and chatting with you.
Well, we have just been ecstatic that you would be able to join us. Thanks for sharing your experiences and your wisdom with us. Have a great night, everyone, and we will see you soon with another incredible leader in the battle against injustice. Take good care. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brooke. I'll follow up with an email tomorrow.
Sounds great. Have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.